This is the one we're gonna paint. Recently, we were lucky enough to be sent a box full of goodies from a good friend of mine, Jim from Reenactment. Thanks very much, Jim. Inside here are loads of really old miniatures, including some ones from 1988 and before, and this includes some classic Space Marines. And some of those are the RTB-01 plastic models. Now, these are the original plastic multi-part Space Marines that were surprisingly posable. They're the classic B-keys that the modern Horus Heresy stuff is based upon, and I've never actually seen any of these models up close. I've certainly never painted any of them, so we thought it'd be really fun, as it's 35 years since the launch of Warhammer 40,000, to paint one in this video. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to paint one in the colours of the Blood Angels, and that's because we've managed to get hold of one of these. This is a sealed pot of Blood Angels Red, which you'll notice is actually more orange, so quite confusing when you first encounter this paint, especially when I was young. But it's not been opened, so we've actually got no idea what the quality of this paint is like, so we'll find out together when we open it, but that's going to be the main colour for our miniature. However, these models have certainly not had a few thin coats on them. They've had very, very thick coats, Jim. So what we need to do is get that paint off first of all, so we're going to strip it. So to do that, what I've got is a model in a glass, and I've got my paint stripper just here, which is from AK Interactive. And so what we're going to do is pour this over the top of it and let it do its magic. So it appears underneath this purple, there's a whole coat of red. Now it seems underneath that layer of red, there's a whole layer of blue. So I don't know what sort of blue paint he's used here, but it's very stubborn, but underneath it, there appears to be bits of green. Ooh, so we've got all that paint off. I'm not really sure what sort of paint it was he used, but that's quite a lot of scrubbing. But anyway, we managed to get rid of it, and I found actually during the process of it, it started softening some of the glue, and that came apart too, meaning some of the parts came apart. Now, I don't know what glue that was as well. It was kind of brown and yucky and sort of gross, but it means now I was able to get to all the little details underneath, and also we can repose the model now. So what I need to do is stick them back together using some super glue, and then we can go and spray it. And just like they did back in the day, we're going to be using a white undercoat. So here he is, undercoated and now ready for painting, and I'll be honest with you, I'm actually really enjoying this. This is really fun looking at this retro model. Look how big his feet are. I'm enjoying it so much I've even drilled out the gun barrel. But anyway, what we're now going to do is start painting him red, which means the moment of truth is here. It's time to open that Blood Angels Red. So here it is once again, and I mean, it sounds all right. I suppose we're going to find out. So here we go. And here it is. Well, it looks all right. It smells all right. So, jokes aside, there is a little bit of an aroma to it, but it's not bad at all. It actually brings back some memories, to be honest with you. But you know what? It actually looks pretty good. And for saying this bottle's not been opened for, what, 30 years? I'm actually really impressed by it. But what we need to do now is find out what the paint's like, so then we can put it onto the miniatures. I'm going to play around with it first of all. Now, red paints that are older ones like this were notorious at the time for being quite thin, and a white undercoat like what we've got here would be absolutely fine because it'd be nice and bright straight away. But if you were starting with a black undercoat, you'd have to do quite a bit of work to build up to it, like painting it brown first of all, for example. But looking at the palette, I mean, it does look a little bit thin as I start spreading it out just there, but I'll thin it down as usual with that bit of water. Yeah, it looks fairly thin, so we'll see how we get on with this. What I'm going to do is just start painting part of the model just to get a feel for it, and then I might switch to a larger brush because this is going to go over almost all of it. But let's start with the shoulder pauldron and see how it is. So, here we go. Well, that is pretty thin, but I will say it is very smooth. I think that's pretty good. I think it's just going to be a case of a few thin coats, really. So I'll just start applying this now and get it all over the miniature. I've applied 3 thin coats, and here we have our Space Marine painted in Blood Angels Red, which, believe it or not, was the colour of Blood Angels back in the 80s. But with that done, what we can now do is start base coating some of the features on the miniature there, and we're looking at doing some black details and silver. Now, the style of the time would mean that with the black, what you'd do is also paint everything that's going to be silver and then pick out the silver on top of it. So that's what I'm going to be doing here, starting out with a pitch black, and I'm going to use some Doom Death Black. Then for the silver, we want a darker one, sort of like Boltgun Metal from the old paint range. So I'm going to use some Lead Belcher for this. But we'll start out with Doom Death Black, and with this, what we can also do is start picking out all the joints on the armour, which will work very much as black lining, which was a sort of shading technique that they used to use, where you just paint black lines into all the recessed areas. So we'll do a little bit of that. I've got a smaller brush, got size 0 here from Arts Opus, and with it, what we want to do is just get some of this really thin down first of all, so it's quite inky, so right down to that point there, because with this, what I've got is that control to paint it into those recesses, and I'm looking at all the panel lines in this stage, so all the joints and things. For example, on the arm just here, looking at the deepest recess, which is going to be right in here, and I just want to carefully run it right into there to help give a bit of distinction between those two panels. Same on here as well, and this is going to be true all across the miniature. Now also I'm looking for any details that I want to be black, such as the holster for his bolt pistol around here, but also going to be painting, as I mentioned, everything that later is going to be silver. So this is going to include the entirety of the bolter. And here we go, all those base coats are applied, and so now we're on to the stage of shading the miniature. I'm going to start out with that silver, and for this, well, at the time there was no wash, so instead of what you'd use if you used anything to shade the silver would be some ink, and that's exactly what we're going to be using here. Now, I want a black ink, and we don't have any of the Citadel sort from the time, but we do have some from Winsor Newton, which I've got in this bottle just here. And you can see with this, if we get it onto the palette, it's a very strong black ink. There we are, it's very, very overwhelming there if we just went straight in and put that over it. So I'm going to dilute it with some water. I'm really going to thin it down so it's much more weak, essentially. We just want to really take that edge off it, bringing it right down to about that point there, and then I'm just going to apply it over the top of the silver, just like it was if it was a wash. You'll see it will mostly run into the recesses, but it will dry a little bit shinier. That ink's on there, and you can see it gives the shading on the silver, but as I mentioned, it's also really shiny, especially on those little backpack vents just around there, which works really nicely for that metal. But if I remember right with inks, if we get them wet, they'll reactivate, so we just need to be careful about avoiding them from now on. But for the red armour, I want to do some shading there too, and I don't want to lose the vibrancy. So what I'm going to do is mix some colours here. I'm going to use some Blood Angels Red and some Corn Red, and just make a slightly darker tone that we can start to run into some recesses. So I'll start out with Blood Angels Red, so there we go, and then just a little bit of the Corn Red, because this is a much stronger colour, much denser with the pigment, as we've seen, compared to the Blood Angels Red, which is actually really weak. So I've got to be careful how much is going in there. See, it very quickly starts to overwhelm it, so we'll just grab a little bit more Blood Angels, and there we go. And so with this, what I'm going to do is thin it right down so it's almost like a glaze, so right down to about that point there, and then with this, I'm going to carefully start applying it into recesses on single armour panels. So for example, areas such as around here. Finish that shading, and so now it's time to move on to the highlighting. And for this, really all we're going to be doing is highlighting that red armour. And for it, what we're going to use is something I used to read in the old painting guides back in the day that I always found really confusing, and that was to say to highlight Blood Angels by using bleached bone at the time, which is sort of like Screaming Skull and the Shempty Bones, that sort of colour. I used to think to myself, that's going to look stupid if you're highlighting red with a bone colour, but what they actually meant was that you mix it and gradually build up your highlights that way. So that's what I'm going to do here. So what I've got is some of Shempty Bone and of course Blood Angels Red once again, and the idea idea here is to do edge highlights, but quite exaggerated. So I'm going to be starting out very broad with them, gradually getting narrower and narrower, but each time I do it, it's going to get a little bit lighter. So what I've got there is that Blood Angel's red. I'm just going to get a little bit of a shabby bone to go with it. So there we go. I'll put them next to each other on the palette, and I'm going to start bringing them together. Now, remembering that Blood Angel's red is definitely weaker than this colour, so I'm just going to, first of all, just bring a little bit of it in and go quite far into that. So I've got a slightly lighter tone than where I started, and with this, just going to make sure it's nicely thinned. And this is going to be the first edge highlight, which is going to go on quite broadly. So if we take a look at the shoulder pauldron just here, I'm going to be bringing it quite far onto it. So I'm looking about that sort of distance there. You see quite far, it's nearly 2 millimeters that I'm going in to that edge just there. Same around here, and it's a matter of applying it as an edge highlight on everything. But then I just want to try and ease it all together. And I'm going to do that by glazing. So if I just get this first one on here, so there we go. You can see the jump between the two colours is quite stark, especially if I then go in and build it up with a second coat to make that colour a little bit stronger. So there we go. And along here too. So this is where the Blood Angel's red on its own is going to come in. Now, because it's such a weak colour anyway, actually all I can do is just get it nice and thin, and with this I can just go over the top of it, and that will just ease those colours together to help build that gradient. So there and there. So I just want to keep on building this up. Just going to add a bit more of the bone colour into it and do it again, start making the line a little bit narrower, and I'm just going to keep on doing this and playing around with it until I get to those quite stark highlights that I'm aiming for. I finished highlighting all that armour, and that was quite challenging because these edges are quite soft, and in some places they just sort of merge into the details, so it was a bit tricky to do, but it definitely makes them look the part of the 1980s. And with that done, we've now just got a few final details to do. Now, I've looked through the Rogue Trader rulebook, and in there it actually gives a diagram of different squad markings for Space Marines, and we need to start out with that, and there's a few other things too. But that squad marking is actually just a black stripe, and this goes on top of the helmet. So for this, I'm just going to make sure I just thinly apply it using our black paint. So there we go. It's going to be right on top. And this marks him out as being a regular trooper. So what we're looking at is this sort of area just down here. Then we've got the chapter badge, and the Blood Angel's chapter badge of this time looks a little bit different from the modern one. The wings are kind of odd shaped and they're very thin, but they again definitely look the part. And finally we've got the eyes, and here all I'm going to do is just put a little bit of emerald green right in the middle just to help them stand out. And here we are with all those little details painted in, and I'm really happy with how it's come out. It's definitely bringing back some memories of the Blood Angel symbol looking like that, and well, all we've got to do now is to paint the base. And of course, here what we're going to do is put on some sand, and then we're going to be painting it with Goblin Green. The first thing to do is to paint the top of the base using some PVA glue applied with an old brush. Once that's done, we've got to dip them into some sand and really make sure it covers the top of the base. And once that's on there, we've just got to leave it to dry. Once that glue is dry, it's time to use the Goblin Green, and here it is really thinned down with water and painted onto the sand so it soaks in. And once that's dry too, all we've got to do is dry brush the surface of the base using a yellow. In this case, what I'm using is some Uriel yellow. And once that's done, the last thing to do is just paint the rim of the base using Goblin Green. And with that, this absolute classic miniature is completed and painted in the style of the 1980s. Now, doing this has been really fun and really challenging too, and you can definitely see how things have changed a lot over the years. I mean, if we compare this miniature to a modern Space Marine, you can see he's absolutely tiny. There's hardly any detail on the miniature, and the painting style is very different as well. Now, for me, I found the painting of this miniature to be quite challenging because there's some very odd things in there. The highlighting is quite different to what I'm used to, and there's some details that aren't highlighted at all, which I found very weird, but he's definitely come out looking the part of a miniature from the 80s. Now, I really like these old miniatures. I find them really really charming, and it might be rose tinted glasses, but there's just something about them that makes me really happy. And I think it's just because it reminds me of when I was a kid. And in fact, there's a lot of people who are just the same. And if you're interested in that, then what I recommend you do is just look up Old Hammer on the internet, and you'll find a whole subset of the wargaming community that are all about these old miniatures and old games. And I find it absolutely fascinating and really nice as well. Now, speaking of nostalgia, if you've got any old stories of old miniatures that you'd like to share, then please do post them down in the comments below, because we'd love to hear them. Anything on old miniatures, old games, all that sort of thing. And if you enjoyed this video, then be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. And if you really liked it, then head over to our website at duncanrhodes.com, which is packed with absolutely loads of painting tutorials to really help improve your painting. Anyway, we hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll see you again very soon.